Legionary. The legionary was the core professional soldier of the Roman imperial army. After the Marian reforms, legionaries became full-time, salaried troops who served for around 20 to 25 years. They were Roman citizens, which already separated them from many other soldiers in the army. Legionaries were heavily equipped, typically carrying the gladius short sword, a large rectangular shield called the scutum, two throwing spears known as pila, and wearing segmented armor, usually larica segmentata. Legionaries were trained to fight in tight formations, relying on discipline rather than individual skill. Their main strength was coordination. Shields overlapped, movements were drilled endlessly, and commands were followed instantly. This allowed them to defeat less organized enemies even when outnumbered. On the battlefield, legionaries formed the main battle line and were responsible for breaking enemy formations through controlled advances. However, legionaries were expensive to maintain. Their armor, weapons, pay, and retirement benefits required massive state resources. Because of this, Rome could not rely on legionaries alone. While they were the backbone of imperial power, they needed support from other troop types to cover weaknesses like mobility, terrain specialization, and numbers. Auxiliary infantry. Auxiliary infantry were non-citizen soldiers recruited from the provinces of the empire. Unlike legionaries, they initially lacked Roman citizenship, but service offered a powerful incentive. After completing around 25 years, auxiliaries and their families were granted citizenship. This made auxiliary service one of Rome's most effective tools for integrating conquered peoples. Auxiliaries were typically lighter armed than legionaries. They often used oval shields instead of the scutum and carried weapons suited to their regional fighting traditions. Some specialized in javelins, others in spears or archery. This diversity allowed Rome to field troops adapted to forests, mountains, deserts, and frontier regions where standard legionary tactics were less effective. On the battlefield, auxiliary infantry supported the legions by holding flanks, skirmishing, or operating in rough terrain. While not as heavily protected, they were more flexible and faster. Their main weakness was lower armor protection and, early on, lower social status compared to citizen soldiers. Still, auxiliaries eventually made up a large portion of the imperial army, proving that Rome's strength came not just from uniformity, but from controlled diversity. Auxiliary cavalry. Auxiliary cavalry units, known as alae, provided the Roman army with speed and mobility. Roman citizens rarely served as cavalry during the imperial period, so Rome relied heavily on provincials with strong horse-riding traditions. These units were recruited from regions famous for cavalry skills, such as Gaul, Spain, and the Balkans. Unlike legionary infantry, auxiliary cavalry fought with spears, swords, and light shields, focusing on rapid movement rather than sustained close combat. Their primary role was reconnaissance, pursuit of fleeing enemies, and protecting the army's flanks. Cavalry units could exploit gaps in enemy lines or chase down routed forces, something heavy infantry could not do efficiently. The strength of auxiliary cavalry was flexibility and speed, but they lacked the defensive staying power of infantry formations. A direct charge into prepared infantry could be disastrous. Because of this, cavalry commanders relied on timing, terrain, and coordination with infantry units. Without cavalry support, Roman armies were slow and vulnerable. With it, they became far more adaptable and lethal across vast imperial frontiers. Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard was an elite unit assigned to protect the emperor and the imperial family. Unlike regular soldiers, Praetorians were stationed mainly in or near the capital and served shorter terms, usually around 16 years while receiving higher pay. Membership was highly prestigious and often reserved for Italians or those with strong political connections. In theory, the Praetorian Guard functioned as a personal security force. In practice, their proximity to power made them extremely influential. Praetorians guarded palaces, escorted emperors, and maintained order in the capital. Because they were well-trained and heavily armed, they could rival legionary units in combat effectiveness. Their greatest weakness was political ambition. Over time, the Praetorian Guard became notorious for interfering in imperial succession, supporting or overthrowing emperors for personal gain. This instability eventually made them a liability rather than an asset. Despite their elite status, their role showed that even Rome's most powerful soldiers could become dangerous when loyalty shifted from the state to personal advantage. Sagittari. Sagittari were specialized auxiliary archers recruited from regions with strong archery traditions, such as Syria, Crete, and parts of Anatolia. Archery was never a major Roman cultural skill, so instead of training citizen soldiers from scratch, Rome incorporated experts from conquered territories. These units could be either infantry archers or mounted archers, depending on their origin. Their main role was ranged support. Sagittari weakened enemy formations before contact, disrupted shield walls, and targeted officers or lightly armored troops. Against enemies who relied heavily on infantry formations, archers created chaos long before legionaries closed in. Mounted archers added even more flexibility, harassing enemies from a distance and retreating before being engaged. The weakness of Sagittori was vulnerability in close combat. They required protection from infantry and careful positioning. Without support, archers could be overrun quickly. Despite this, Sagittori became essential in eastern provinces and frontier warfare, proving that Roman success depended not just on discipline, but on integrating foreign military expertise into a unified system. Speculatores. Speculatores were elite scouts and intelligent soldiers attached to legions or directly to high-ranking commanders. Their primary task was gathering information rather than fighting in large formations. They operated ahead of the army, observing enemy movements, terrain conditions, and potential ambush points. Unlike standard infantry, speculatores traveled light and often moved in small groups. Speed, stealth, and awareness were far more important than armor or heavy weapons. In some cases, they also acted as messengers, carrying critical orders across dangerous territory faster than regular couriers. Their greatest strength was information control. A Roman army that knew enemy positions and intentions could avoid disasters and choose favorable battles. However, speculatores were vulnerable when detected. If discovered, they had little protection and few ways to escape organized enemy forces. Even so, their role highlights an often overlooked reality of Roman warfare. Victories were frequently decided before the first sword was drawn. Cohortes urbanae. The urban cohorts were paramilitary units stationed in Rome and other major cities. They were created to maintain public order, control riots, and support civil authority, acting as a middle ground between regular soldiers and law enforcement. Unlike the Praetorian Guard, their role was not personal protection of the emperor, but internal security. Urban cohort soldiers were well armed and trained, comparable to legionaries, but their duties focused on crowd control, crime suppression, and emergency response. In times of unrest, they could be deployed quickly to restore order. Because of their permanent presence in cities, they became a stabilizing force in densely populated urban centers. Their weakness was limited battlefield experience. While capable fighters, they were not intended for prolonged campaigns. Still, their existence shows how Rome extended military structure into civilian life, ensuring that order within the empire was enforced with the same discipline that conquered its borders. Classiarii. Classiarii were sailors and marines serving in the Roman navy. While Rome is often remembered as a land power, control of the Mediterranean required thousands of trained naval personnel. Classiarii operated warships, transported troops, and secured coastal regions and river systems. In combat, they fought during boarding actions, coastal raids, and amphibious landings. Their equipment was lighter than that of legionaries, prioritizing mobility aboard ships. Although they lacked the prestige of legion soldiers, their role was critical in protecting supply lines and maintaining communication across the empire. A major limitation of classiarii was status. They were often paid less and granted citizenship later than legionaries. Despite this, naval forces enabled Rome to move armies quickly and suppress piracy. Without classiarii, the empire's vast size and interconnected economy would have been impossible to sustain.